Welcome. So it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Jelena Vuckovic as the chair of our Department of Electrical Engineering, but also a fellow Eastern European. We were chatting about this on the way here. It turns out we grew up about 500 kilometers away from each other. We actually just mapped it, just before this, make sure we know where we were. Jelena came to the US in the late 90s to study at Caltech after her undergrad at the University of Niš, which is where she grew up. I'm just paraphrasing, obviously, from her biography. So anyway, she came to the US in the late 90s, studied at Caltech, and then came to Stanford as a postdoc in 2002 and joined the faculty in 2003. I'm sure you know her as the department chair of electrical engineering. I don't have to introduce that part or about her research. She'll tell us much more about that anyway. She grew up a big fan of alternative music, and I thought this was a t-shirt design, but it turns out it's a real thing from The Guardian, May 2017, and now we all want the link. So, and you need to figure out where your favorite band is on there, but this is absolutely going to go into our circuits curriculum, next year, now that I'm aware of it. So what else? So Jelena is a fellow of IEEE, APS, and OSA. OSA is the Optical Society. She has won many awards, which I'm not going to read. They're on her webpage and on her the short biography which you received. I think that's maybe I should stop talking and I should hand it over to you. It's really a privilege to introduce you, Jelena.
Of course.
Let's welcome Professor Vuckovic.
Thank you so much, Eric, for your kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to actually speak at this seminar. I actually put this on the first slide to keep you busy before I start talking. And I already said in my biography that I grew up really, being a big fan of alternative music. I think I know probably everything that's here, and I understand connections. And I was just talking with John De Silva from our department about it, and Eric for about 15 minutes before it started. But anyway, this is kind of combining my passion for electrical engineering and alternative music. So, and we'll actually have it in circuits, as Eric said, starting next year. So this is where I grew up. I was born in Serbia. That used to be former Yugoslavia. And I was born in a city called Niš. So if you look at the map of Serbia, it's here, but Yugoslavia actually was kind of these 6 countries here combined. And I'm from the south of Serbia, kind of close to northern Greece, about 4 hours from Thessaloniki. So I would spend summers really in Greece with my parents. Sometimes we would go to the Adriatic Sea, which is the sea between Croatia and Italy, but Greece was much closer. And Eric grew up somewhere here at the border between Romania and Hungary, so actually pretty close to where I'm from. So these are pictures of Niš. I think it's actually a beautiful city, but also it's an ancient city and actually existed. It was called Nisus about 2,000 years ago, and Emperor Constantine the Great, the one who founded Constantinopolis, modern Istanbul, actually was born there. So you can actually still visit his summer palace, Mediana, in the city. So there are a lot of these ancient fortresses and a lot of history there. So this is a little bit more about my schools and some pictures. Actually, most of my photos are still over there in albums in my parents' house. But here you can see me about age 6, I think, coming back from Greece, clearly very tan with my parents and my brother. This is me in middle school. I was in Scouts. There were no Girl and Boy Scouts. There were only Scouts. And it was very serious, actually. I stopped camping in middle school. This is after about 2 weeks somewhere in the forest, after survival. You see, I didn't wash hair, actually, for about 2 weeks, and I was eating plants somewhere. So now, I'm not really camping anymore. I had it all by the age of 14. Also, I wanted to show you, I found pictures of my schools. So I was born in Niš, and then I lived in a town which is about 50 miles from Niš, where my parents worked, called Paraćin. That's where I went to elementary school and also music school. So in Serbia, it's very interesting. All these schools, they look pretty. So there's a lot of emphasis on education, but these are all public schools. Everything is free. So for example, for music school, if you pass entrance exam, you can go to music school. It's a really good music education. Then I went to math and physics high school. This is a picture of my high school. It's again, if you pass the entrance exam, you go to a really good school. And likewise, if you're interested in something else, then you can go to a different type of school. Actually, it's very interesting, school system. And I went to actually high school in Niš, and if you meet people from Serbia here, and a lot of them are engineers, they actually either went to this high school or another high school like that in Belgrade, which is also for math and physics. So we actually have connections through that. And then I actually studied electrical engineering. So this is the University of Niš, and this is this building of electrical engineering. I already mentioned that I was considering, actually, I really thought of studying architecture since I was probably 5 or 6 until senior year of high school. And then I changed my mind and decided to go to electrical engineering, influenced by my older brother, who was actually electrical engineering major. And I liked math and physics, and clearly I went to high school for that, but I was also very interested in the arts. I went to music school, I played flute, I was interested in alternative music. I didn't think electrical engineering was cool at all, right? Architects looked cool, but engineers not so much. So but then, I was, I don't know. Okay, maybe I'll just do electrical engineering. It's also closer, it's a good school, and I changed my mind and went into electrical engineering. And again, there you have to decide on your major before the entrance exam for college. So it's not that you go into college and then you pick your major in the first 2 years. No, high school, kind of by the end of high school, you have to decide what you are going to do for the rest of your life. And sometimes people change their mind, and move from, I have friends who moved from electrical engineering to movie directing or, something completely different. But, you have to be pretty focused from early on. So anyway, I didn't regret. I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. And then after graduation, I first went to University of Sydney. I spent most of 1996 in Sydney. This is me. You can see Australian flag there. And I worked at the University of Sydney. I kind of started grad school there, but actually also did some research on information theory, error correcting codes. I even published some papers on that, on Reed-Solomon codes. Occasionally people send me emails and ask me, oh, what, can you explain me this paper that you wrote? And I don't remember anything. But anyway, that's how I started, but then went to Caltech at the end of '96. And when I came to Caltech, I thought I would do information theory. And that was like a big time for those of you who do information theory for turbo codes. And the leading group was at Caltech, and I came there and was, I'll do information theory. I like that. And then I met my former PhD advisor, Axel Scher. We also had qualifying exam, like here. And qualifying exam covers all the areas, kind of like old qualifying exam, but 4 areas. And I did really well in physics. Not surprisingly, because we had a lot of physics in our undergraduate education, but I didn't really consider doing that for grad school. And then, my former advisor was examining in physics, and I did really well. And he said, oh yeah, if you're interested in working in my group, you can join us. We work on these photonic crystals, like what's photonic crystals? And he was explaining how they're fabricating, these periodic structures in materials to manipulate the flow of light. And I was thinking about it, and it was, that sounds cool. It would be a lot to learn. I've never done any experiments like this in my life, just labs, in college. And I decided to join his group, right? So this is me working in the lab on a big system called electron beam projection lithography. This is actually like 4 Tesla magnets and some other things. And this is our group. And what's actually very interesting is that the group was very diverse. This is not how Caltech looked at all, but Axel's group was very diverse. He grew up in Uganda, in Africa, and also, if you look at the members, it's kind of what we aspire also to do these days, right? So these are graduate students and staff. Right? So this is me at the graduation. I think this is master's. This is PhD graduation. And then after I graduated, I came to Stanford, right? And first, I was a postdoc for about a year with Yoshi Yamamoto. I don't have pictures, unfortunately, but it was in the old Winston lab, which later moved to Spilker, where I still am. So in the 2002, while I was a postdoc, I also applied for a job and got a job here and at some other places and decided to stay here. And I've been here for about 20 years, if you count postdoc years as well. So these are pictures of my lab, from a long time ago. This is when Arka was my PhD student. He's Eric's collaborator, professor, tenured professor now at the University of Washington. And this is me from early days. This is also my group over the years. 2005, this is kind of the first team. I'll just explain who these people are because they had enough time to make careers and become famous. So all of these people also are actually doing pretty well. But I unfortunately don't have time to explain all these great people and where they are. But this is interesting actually because this is the first team I hired and they were not much younger than me. So we're sort of like friends, and this is the old building that doesn't exist anymore, old Winston Lab. So this is my first student, Hatice Altuk. She's now a full professor of biomedical engineering at EPFL. And then I hired Ido as a postdoc. Ido Wax was a PhD student of Yoshi Yamamoto and became my postdoc. He's now a full professor at the University of Maryland. And then Dirk was my second student. He's professor of electrical engineering at MIT. And then I hired Maria Makarova, and she's now a professor at Monterrey Tech. She's focused on teaching and also getting girls into science. So she lives in Mexico. And then Ilya Fushman, he's a partner at Kleiner Perkins, so very different trajectory. And then Andre Faron, he's also a full professor at Caltech. So it's kind of very interesting, right? When I hired them, this was like the first group we worked together day and night. And now they're all senior people, and you can see kind of how they developed and where their lives and careers brought them. And then 5 years later, group is a little bit bigger, and then a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, you can kind of see it growing. More and more people are there, and even from these new generations, a lot of people are now at tenured faculty or actually managers in companies and so on. And this is between 2018 and 19. Again, the group is even bigger. And these are shirts that I was just talking about with John De Silva. For those of you who are alternative music fans, my students found out that I was listening to alternative music, including Joy Division. So this was inspired by Joy Division cover, but actually are real data from our experiments. And they made these shirts. And then, of course, we don't have a group picture now because of the pandemic, but this is my group right now, and it's a wonderful mix of postdocs and grad students from electrical engineering, applied physics, and physics, and undergrads. So now, what do we do? Just in a few minutes, I work on photonics, and photonics is guiding and manipulating light, really on chip, which has a lot of different applications. These are not real things. These are some artistic renderings of different circuits processing light. But it has a lot of useful applications. And these are some that my group is interested in, like optical interconnects for data centers, using optical connections inside of computers to reduce energy consumption, increase operating speed, LiDAR systems for self-driving cars. You've still seen self-driving cars. LiDAR systems now are gigantic toasters sitting on the roof of the car, not very aesthetically pleasant and very expensive. So we're working on kind of miniaturizing that. Then we also work on some pieces for augmented reality glasses, biosensing systems in collaboration with other groups, at the moment mostly TOMSO, and also optical computing platforms, primarily quantum computing and quantum systems. So one kind of big piece of the work that we do is this inverse design, which is combination of optimization and AI techniques, application of that on photonics problems. So we're trying to design new photonic devices that are optimal for particular application. And this is how they look. They look kind of like errors or abstract paintings. So I think this part of my work is kind of combining this interest in art and engineering, because these things are also beautiful. And a lot of people are asked us for these high resolution images to make posters and hang them in their offices. But they're super useful also. So we're designing a lot of elements for new applications, new functionalities, but also making them more efficient, more compact. And then we also work on quantum systems. And you've heard about all these quantum, interest in quantum computing. from various companies like IBM and Google, where they make superconducting processors. And then there is a lot of interest in these atomic physics systems. So this is from the group of Emanuel Bloch in Munich. We're working on the same experiments in semiconductor platform. So you see this is less busy than this. It's very similar platform. We don't need to trap atom. It's already trapped inside of the material, semiconductor material, but in principle, physics is the same as in superconducting systems or atomic physics systems. And we work mostly with two materials, diamond and this silicon carbide, which is basically used in fake diamonds, cheaper version of diamond, like fake diamond jewelry, and also abrasives. And what for us, these quantum bits are these impurities in these materials. So normally clean, pure diamond would not have color, likewise silicon carbide. But then if you dope it with some impurities, then you can actually get diamond jewelry, for example, in different colors. And we exactly work with the same dopants, but in much lower concentrations. Our diamonds still look colorless, but we apply very, very sparse dopants and use those as quantum bits. Right? So we're trying to build quantum networks and quantum computers and so on. So anyway, that's kind of what we work on, but the story doesn't end there. We do a lot of publication in this building, right? You need that. You need to make these photonic circuits to connect those quantum bits within each other. So these are actual pieces of diamond that are carved in these inverse design patterns, and these are pieces of silicon carbide that are carved out in photonic structures. And with that, I'll kind of summarize my introduction and let you ask questions and finish by showing again my group. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
This is...
Wait, I've done only a quarter of work, so don't wait with applause, right?
Yeah, hold it.
Hold it.
Look, we've got questions. These are actually questions from the audience that were submitted. Some of probably submitted by some of you, some submitted probably by folks who are over Zoom. Maybe I'll, how do I pick them? I think I'll just take them in the order in which they were asked. So there's no particular order. They're not grouped. So the first question is, what's your pathway to leadership, such as department chair, after you get tenure?
Hey, that's an interesting question because I really never aspired to be a leader. It was not really on my bucket list. And somehow it happened, right? So I think there are various trajectories. Some people are, of course, more focused and interested in becoming leaders, and there are different training programs and so on. I never attended any of those, but I ended up actually having a leadership position. So what happened along the way is I was invited at certain points throughout the career to have some kind of leadership positions in the department or at the university related to strategic planning or selecting new leaders, right? And I thought that was a good idea for me to participate in those committees, because if I'm on the committee, then they will not select me, right? So I always accepted to be on the committee selecting new leaders, right? But that kind of counted towards my leadership education, I guess. And in the department for a number of years, I've also been on the executive committee. Electrical engineering is a big department, so we have something called the executive committee where we have representatives of different areas of electrical engineering and department chair. So I've been on that committee for more than 10 years. And yeah, so I always accepted the invitation to do some leadership work as long as it didn't affect my science, and also if I thought that I could do something good, right? And then, last year I became department chair. Again, it was not on my bucket list. My colleagues wanted me to be department chair more than I wanted to be a department chair, but I thought that I had good ideas. And I also thought that it was a good idea to have a little bit different perspective, right? And I could offer a different perspective, as a woman, heavy experimentalist, immigrant, a lot of different boxes are checked there. So I decided to do it for a bit. And I actually have a good time, and I think we've done some good things, and people are really, listening to my different perspective, and I'm listening. So I think, yeah, that's how it went. But I think there are actually different ways of becoming a leader, and I know there are some programs at Stanford, leadership programs, and so on. I can't say anything about it because I never attended any of those.
So, okay, it's working. Related question, also on the faculty track, what's your advice for junior faculty now in terms of balancing various activities?
Okay, yeah, that's a very, very good question. The first advice is embrace chaos because it's very hard to balance things. You know, I think I've seen people really try to plan and struggle with that. I think it's important to say to yourself that, you know, things are unpredictable. You can't really plan everything. Just embrace chaos, right? But on the other hand, a lot is happening, and I think you need to know how to prioritize things, right? So there is a chaos, but in that chaos, you know what's priority for you. And you always pick what's the priority. And you have to juggle things all the time. And, you know, priorities are different for different people. I've always known what my priorities were. You know, it's my research group and science. I mean, work related, of course. I'm not talking about private life here, but you know, that was always the priority, and everything else comes second, right, or third or fourth. And you know, in that picture, you know, it's easier to juggle things, right? Because if you have to pick between 10 different things happening, you know, I know if there is a student calling me or I need to do some science or something related to that, you know, that always comes first. So that's the main advice that I have, but it will be chaotic no matter what you do.
So, you know, also related to this leadership position is, what challenges do you see as a female leader who is in a male-dominated field?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, again, I'm probably non-traditional leader because I didn't plan to be a leader. So I just happened to be one. I think, like in any profession dominated by people who don't look like you, you need to spend a little bit more time developing that trust, you know. And I think, you know, some people are fine right away, but I mean, let's just talk about daycare teachers, right? You know, it's a primarily female profession, right? If you send your kids to a daycare center and there is a guy teacher, the first thing that, you know, people would be, oh, you know, is he a good person to take care of my kids, right? Because it's a female profession. They've only seen women doing that, right? And, you know, I understand that, you know, it's kind of a natural reaction because if someone has never seen a woman department chair, they would be, oh, does she know what she's doing, right? And that's fine. You know, I think it's good to question. So there is a little bit of time, that patience, right? And to develop that trust. But I should say that really, I think my colleagues trusted my leadership capabilities more than I did trust them, which is always good. And they've also, I never really felt that I had extra challenges because for being a woman, right, in this department chair position. And that's really because I think they thought that I would be the best leader for this particular stage of the department, right? So we have a good conversation and they're listening to what I have to say and I'm listening to what they have to say. So I don't think that there are major challenges. But in general, yes, I think there are, in any role which is, again, dominated by people who don't look the same as you, there would be challenges. And I think it's reasonable to accept that it takes time for people to develop trust in you.
Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'll combine two questions, which are tell us more about your work, and combined with what experiences led you to specialize in photonics. I think you partially answered that, but maybe we'll revisit that right now.
Yeah, so I talked about my work. So broadly, it's photonics and quantum optics. So really manipulating the flow of light for different applications and manipulating the flow of light on a chip. And again, applications are vary, right? But at the moment, big effort is really related to quantum systems. And it's been from start, actually. When I started the group at Stanford, I also worked on quantum, although that was not in at that time at all, but that's what I was interested in. And we worked on pieces of quantum networks. And half of the group kind of works on classical optics and classical photonics applications. And that's still the case. And we have some applications vary, right? At the moment, we also work on on-chip particle accelerator, or things LiDAR, things that we didn't work on in the past, but it's still related to manipulating and controlling the flow of light. And then what led me to do photonics, as I described in this brief introduction, I was interested in math and physics. I went to school specialized in math and physics. And when I say specialized, these schools are kind of probably 90% of the people who you would see from my country being in the US as professors or, in industry, they would go to these schools, right? So these schools are basically, in like 11th grade, I would have 5 different maths and 5 hours of physics and programming, philosophy, language, and that's it, right? So you just math and physics. So you pass entrance exam and you focus on what you're interested in. And, those are people who go to Olympiads, math and physics Olympiads. I mean, I actually enjoyed it. My parents are not engineers. Actually, my brother is the first in the family who went into engineering. My father is a philosophy professor, and my mom has a business degree. And they let me pick whatever I wanted to do. And I actually decided to go to that school myself and also to engineering. And, I've always been interested in math and physics, but also interested in French and arts and music, a lot of other things. And then when I came to Caltech, as I said, I was interested in potentially doing information theory because that's something that I did before and published papers. But then I thought that, working on photonics would provide me with the opportunity to learn a lot of new things and also do experiments, which is something that I didn't have opportunity to do in my home country, right? Because doing fabrication and building, these complicated setups, that's super expensive. There are only a few places in the world where you can do that. And that's really what my advisor told me, like, look, there are only a couple of places where you can do this. Why don't you try? And if it doesn't work, you can go back to math or do something else. And, I tried it and I liked it. And I should say it was intimidating, definitely at first, especially since, the first project that I started working on was building this projection lithography system. So it was superconducting magnet, and I had to do machining, like everything that I'd never done in my life, right? I had old retired machinist from Hughes Research Lab helping me do fine machining that I couldn't do. And building the system and vacuum system and everything and optics. And, but I learned so much that I really enjoyed it. And exactly what I thought I would accomplish by kind of being busy and learning new things happened. And I stayed in photonics.
Takes a second for the mic to boot up. How did you like Caltech? What was good about it? What was bad about it?
This is recorded, right?
It is, yes.
Okay, well, the bad part I'll answer later. Okay.
We can skip a question.
Yes, no, I'm joking. I'll answer everything. Okay, so your experience in grad school depends primarily, I guess, from your on your research group, right? And it's kind of your immediate environment. And as I showed, that was late 90s, right? So the research group where I was quite unusual, and I was very diverse. That's probably the reason why I ended up in that research group, because there were literally three women in the whole building, right? I had a great time actually, because my advisor also had very unusual, background and upbringing. He's German, but he grew up in Uganda. His wife is African American, black scientist, and he also lived around the world. And we had also, in our group, women and minorities, back then, like more than 20 years ago. So it was very, interesting and international, and a lot of different perspectives. Not just in that sense, we also had a guy who just came from the military and was working on, his PhD degree. So that really, I thought that that was great. You just offered like this worldwide view, you know, and it's not that everyone was the same as me. I mean, that's also not the point, right? I like that everybody was so different and that I learned so much by interacting with all of them and, you know, changed me as a person. And you also become, again, you understand other people's views and interests and perspectives and can have a good dialogue. And I thought that that was great. Caltech, also the other thing that I really liked is I learned a lot at Caltech. You know, Eric warned me not to watch that clock, and actually I've been watching it, and now I'm thinking, why is it only 15 minutes, right? Anyway, right? Okay, so anyway, I'll go back to the question. I learned a lot. I mean, I did, as I said, I hadn't done any photonics before I came there. All the quantum mechanics, or kind of most of quantum mechanics that I learned, and quantum optics I learned while I was there. And it was not just from classes. I mean, 2 classes, but classes teach you only a little bit. If you want to become expert in something, you have to learn it yourself. I learned experiments. I learned quantum physics. I learned quantum optics, photonics, a lot of things. I became independent scientist. And I think, you know, I tell that to my students, the point of PhD education is to become an independent scientist, right? It's not to do your best work. I hope all of my students do their best work after they graduate. You know, it would be sad that their best work is, you know, in their early 20s, right? But I did become an independent scientist, right? I see from someone who was intimidated by, especially by all the experiments, because I'd never done them, I did become an independent scientist, and I built my own lab, and I could, you know, think independently and start new things. So those were great things. Caltech is very small. I think maybe that comes in the bad category. I mean, it has advantages, you know, because you literally know everyone. I mean, when I got a job at Stanford, they asked me to bring my transcript, and I went to Caltech for commencement and walked into registrar's office and asked for transcript, and I knew registrar by name, and she just prepared it there in 15 minutes. And I brought the transcript back to Stanford, and they didn't believe me it was original, because at Stanford you had to wait like more than a week to get it, right? So that, you know, Caltech is less bureaucratic, it's smaller, you know, it's everybody knows everyone, you know, and even for many years when I would go back, people would still know me, you know, people who work in convenience store, register, everywhere. And I thought that was just great. And also level of trust, right? We had the key to the stockroom and convenience store. You can unlock it in the middle of the night and get snacks and just, you know, write and pay, you know, in there, or transistors and resistors and whatever you need for your experiment, and just walk out. And that was awesome. But then after, you know, 5 years, you just know everyone, and it can get a little bit constrained, right? If you are not sure what you want to do, you have fewer choices than here. If your life revolves around campus, it's certainly less interesting than here. There are no sports. I was a good basketball player at Caltech. I'm not a bad basketball player, but, you know, definitely by standards, you know, Stanford standards, I'm nowhere near good, right? Yeah, it's very focused on science and technology. And if you actually go there on science and engineering, and if you go there and you're not sure what you want to do, you have fewer choices. So those are kind of on the educational side, maybe bad things. And I told, well, I see Dominic, who is my student. When I met him when he was an undergrad at Caltech, I visited, and they took me to lunch, and I told them, they asked me, oh, how was your time at Caltech? And I said, I don't know, it was great. But, you know, instead of, when people meet you on the street, instead of asking, how are you doing? They ask you, how is your research? Is that still happening, right? And I thought that was strange, right? And then, you know, Dominic told me that that was still happening, but he stopped doing it after I asked him that question. So anyway, that's still part of the culture.
The undergrad culture?
I think
or
maybe more
graduate
culture,
okay.
But if some undergrads who do research probably do it. The other thing that happened actually was also, I remember once we were celebrating New Year's Eve, which is a big deal in Europe, obviously, New Year's. I mean, here too, but in Europe even more. So there was a party for New Year's Eve, and someone called the security because they couldn't work on their homework. That was.
Sounds like a Caltech story.
So anyway, that's another true story. But I had a great time actually. So that there were a few things that I don't think happened at Stanford, as far as I heard from my students. But anyway.
So I think we have one more question from here, and then we'll open it up to the audience. What is your advice for EE students who are rotating on this first year of their PhD?
So we've always had rotation system. I mean, maybe not officially, but in applied physics, it's more official. One advice that I tell to everyone, my students or all other students, is start with the group of your first choice, if you can, and then, if you don't like it, then you go to the group of your second choice. I mean, I think rotation system is great because it's much better than committing right away to one group, because, from a distance, things may look amazing, and of course the group may be great, but you don't really know details of day-to-day operations, how work is done and everything. And you really need to physically be there to make up your mind. And I think that's very important, right? Or people come here and then realize they want to do something else. But the process is certainly a bit like musical chairs game. I mean, musical chairs, right? And people drop out of process, right? So they stay in that group, and then there may not be opening in the group of your first choice in the second or third quarter. So what I suggest, what I recommend to people is, if they can, try to go into your top choice group first, and then second choice, and so on. And you can always drop out of the process. If you go to the group in any quarter and you like it, and you don't think that you need to rotate anymore, you can just stop rotating and stick there and work on your research there, right? I think it's a great system. There is no perfect system, but I think having the opportunity to rotate is much better than committing to one group right away, right? Because some universities like MIT, you have to go to a specific group, and you go there, and if you don't like it after 3 months, it's literally like leaving group. It's more pressure, right? But here, you can still move somewhere else and try something else. I mean, of course, you can try it later, but I think it's a good idea to figure out what you want to do in the first 2 quarters. And if you can't, then use the third quarter as well.
All right. So that concludes the second third of the seminar, of the meeting, I guess, of the Meet the Faculty. So now the third part is your questions. So by the way, my apologies if I missed something on that list, but let's just open it up to you. And I'm not sure about Zoom questions. I don't know how we're going to do those. Maybe, are you logged in on Zoom? Maybe they pop
here.
up.
It's not my computer. It's actually from here. They may see questions there.
Well, just look at the chat window.
It's not connecting from my computer. It's connected from here.
Oh, well, let's just take live questions first anyway. Professor Gao.
Hi, Grace. Oh, thank you.
I'm really impressed by not just how successful you are, but more about how successful the students are. And I wonder if you can share some tips how to better prepare students for their.
Oh, thank you. I think that's a great question. Yes, so I said one thing already, which is related to that. I view PhD time as a time when people are supposed to become independent scientists. It shouldn't be the time, there shouldn't be a pressure for them to do their best life's work there. I mean, they need to explore different things, they need to learn, and the goal is that after 5 years, they can move on and do their own thing. And I give them maximum flexibility to explore within the group different things. I don't like giving a problem which may take 5 years to solve, but if it fails, they can graduate. If it succeeds, they get Nobel Prize. That's not a good idea. Sometimes it happens that they do fantastic work, but I like to break it up into pieces and let them work on these pieces. And if they fail in an incremental step, it's less stressful than failing on something that's your PhD thesis topic. So they actually joke with me often, few weeks before graduation, they come to my office and it's like, what's my PhD thesis topic? I have to send an abstract, right? And then we put it together. Like, oh, I think let's give this title, right? I mean, it's all a good work, and then we kind of combine it together. And I think that flexibility is important, and I think that alleviating pressure is important, and also explaining them that their best work should be actually after they graduate and move on. And they leave when they are ready to be independent, and I also let them kind of choose when they leave. I mean, it's about 5 years again, but exit point depends on what they want to do later. If they go to industry, it's a different story. Sometimes they want to stay longer for various reasons, finish experiment, have short, because they can only do that experiment here, or for personal reasons. Some of my students had kids and stayed longer, and so on. So there are a variety of reasons. So some of them stay longer, some of them don't stay that long. But I think that dialogue, on what they plan to do, what do they want to do in their life, what kind of training they need, are they ready to go, and so on, is important. And I think that's kind of reflected in their lives later on, because I've seen them, even the ones who went into kind of more business-related careers like venture capital, I've seen them kind of develop that interest in grad school. And so I mentioned my student who is a partner at Kleiner Perkins. During grad school, he started becoming interested in startups and business plans and so on, although he worked on very, very fundamental projects, right? He published like papers in Science and highly cited and everything, and worked on quantum stuff back then. But then he started getting interested in this, different programs they have in business school. How do you start a company and everything? And I was supportive of that. I mean, if he's here, if people are here, they should use the opportunity to do all of that. If that's what they want to do in life, then they should learn everything they need to be independent and pursue their career later. And I think it works. I mean, I think all of them are amazingly successful people.
Other questions? Are there questions on Zoom, Mary Kay? Okay. Oh. Okay. I will say that, yeah. Yeah, so if anybody's on, so this is for the Zoom audience. If you're on Zoom and you'd like to ask a question, just unmute yourself, clear your throat, and speak, and we'll see if we can hear you. And if not, we'll go up. Okay, maybe there's no questions on Zoom. But anyway, let's take questions either on Zoom or here live. Yes, please.
You mentioned that your brother encouraged you to pursue electrical engineering. Yeah. Talk more about how he convinced you.
Yeah, I mean.
Sorry, one question. Do you mind if I repeat the question for the Zoom? I just realized that I don't think this picks you up. So, so for the Zoom audience, I should have said that for the first question too, but I'm going to try now. So the question was, can you tell us more about how your brother influenced you to be an electrical engineer? Was that, am I summarizing that correctly for the Zoom audience? Okay.
Yeah, so that's so that's an interesting question. So my brother didn't actually go into math and physics school. He, like all schools are specialized, he went to the school focused on biology, and he planned to study medicine. And that's a highly competitive entrance exam, just like electrical engineering. And then 5 days before the entrance exam, he decided that he didn't want to do medicine and that he would do electrical engineering actually instead. And my parents were first, stressed out about that, but he did quite well and, passed the entrance exam and went into electrical engineering and liked it, and then, he was already studying when I was thinking of what to study and where to apply. And, he kind of along the way influenced me also first he was interested in physics, and he said, "Oh, I think you would be interested in physics. It's pretty cool. It's not just math, but explains how the world works." And then the same thing with electrical engineering. I would see him, things that he was studied, and I also, when I was in high school, we had these physics math Olympiads, and you could actually pick the area in the physics Olympiad that you would focus on. And I picked electromagnetism, and went through electromagnetism for college in high school, and that kind of gave me some view of how electrical engineering looks like. And then I was talking with him a lot through that time, and then he was showing me all the circuits things that he was doing, which of course is connected to electromagnetism. So at the time when I was thinking of applying to college, at least I had a picture of how studying electrical engineering looked like. I didn't have an idea of, how my life would look like later on, but I thought, well, okay, even if I don't like it, I could still be a physics teacher or math teacher with electrical engineering degree. I didn't think of grad school or being a scientist back then. But yeah, I think that kind of seeing what he was studying and what he was doing was really, really influenced. I think what was important is that I liked math and physics, but I realized pretty early that I like to do things that are applied to something, right? It doesn't have to be immediately applied, right? But engineering or architecture or kind of, engineering and math applied to something that people can use or something that you see. So I still see that in my work. And by the way, my brother is a software engineer, so he is kind of more on the software side. Electrical engineering in Serbia or in Yugoslavia is kind of combined with computer science. So, but he's more on the software side. Thank you. Okay.
Other questions?
Thanks. I was just curious your thoughts on quantum computing in 5 to 10 years. There's a lot of hype right now.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, so the question was on the prospects for quantum computing in the next 5 to 10 years. And since there is a lot of hype and a lot of challenges. So Eric knows that because he was a grad student at Stanford, but so he was friend with some of my former students. But even in 2003, when I started working here, as I mentioned, we were working on quantum things, like quantum computing related things, which was before hype. So clearly, I've never given up working on it because I think it's a very interesting problem. And it's a very exciting science. And I like the idea that you are exploring physics, basic physics, and looking at this interaction at the quantum systems, of light matter interaction in our case. But at the same time, you can also build practical things for computing or for networking or for sensing. There is a lot of hype. It's not something that will happen overnight. I think there is a mismatch between expectations of maybe some people who are funding some efforts and people who are working in companies in terms of what would be delivered five years from now. It's more in the domain of basic research in some way, but will it happen? Yeah, I do think it will happen. I mean, there are already useful things that are happening in the space of quantum sensing and quantum networking, but at a short distance. Even quantum computing, although it's not yet at the scale which is useful. So the road will be longer, but it will happen. And it may not happen with any of the platforms that are now viewed as the most commercial. Also for us in academia, I actually think that we should be working on looking into what's next, what's out there, like in semiconductor industry, right? While people were building computers with vacuum tubes, other people were working on integrated semiconductor platform which enabled modern processors, right? They didn't stick to vacuum tubes, right? There was something that worked okay, but it would never scale up. And I don't think that some of the leading platforms would scale up because there are very major obstacles there. So it's important to think about the problem and work on it. It will take time, but yeah, there will be practical effect of quantum technologies.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just
No, it's okay.
sensed a break, but
Yes, it's okay.
I want to confirm that I've always thought of Professor Vuckovic as a quantum professor. So I think I've known of you at least since 2003-ish, right? So yeah. So actually, maybe if I can add to that, do you think, speaking of hype, do you think, because in my mind, this quantum computing thing has been happening in academia for decades, right? What do you, in your mind, what has caused this inflection where it really seems to have gone into hype mode? Is it the entrance of companies like Google and Microsoft in the game, or is it something else?
Yeah, I think it is the entrance, in big part, the entrance of the major companies in the game, and yes, that certainly made it a different game, right? Because suddenly they're kind of working on something and scaling it and investing a lot of money into the problem. But I don't think that impacts the work that you're doing in academia. I mean, it's always been like that. You work in photonics, for example, which also my group works on, and part of the group even works on classical photonics. There is a lot of practical interest now, and companies building systems. It's always been. I remember when I started at Stanford, in the early 2000s. My colleagues, and of course, electrical engineering is a department which produced many successful companies, and people know how to start companies, and they understand how to make things commercial and practical. I came from Caltech, which was very science-oriented back then. Even it was, starting a company was considered kind of like, no, right? That's making your science unpure, right? If you start a company, right? So I came here, and then it was a very different place. And I remember my colleague telling me, if you want something to be used 5 years from now, practically, you have to solve all the problems today, right? Yeah, because then you have 5 years to do packaging and everything else. Right? So that's the time scale. That's the time scale on which they work in companies. Maybe it's 3 years now, but you need to be a few years ahead in academia. So if we have something now which is mature enough that it could be used in cell phone or whatever, quantum network, it will still take like 5 years to make it, make it into practical systems. But also, if it's 5 years from its practical application, it's probably not a good problem to work in the academia. Right? It's a time to let it go and have industry, companies work on it. And that's, I think that's what we see in photonics. That's what we see also with some quantum computing problems. In some cases, it's premature, but if you look at these major companies, they're not really working on the same problems that we're working on in academia. It's very, very different, right? I mean, I think maybe analogy is they're working on vacuum tubes, and we're really looking into a new transistor.
Other questions? Please.
Sure. Hi, Professor. I hope this hasn't been asked before, but if you were in undergrad or graduate school again, what problem would you want to study?
What problem would I want to study if I were in a grad school? I mean, assuming that I went into electrical engineering and physics. I think these days, considering today's landscape of problems, I mean, it would probably not be far from where I'm now. I think probably something, again, experimental. Although I started really as a theorist, I think I would prefer experimental work. And again, something that has a lot of physics in it, right? But also applied problem. I don't think I would be interested. I mean, I love physics, but I don't think I would be interested in working on something that you cannot experimentally verify. I also don't think I would work on something which doesn't have any possible application, just purely basic science. I actually really find joy in, working on basic problems that could maybe find application. It's not 5 years from now, but, maybe 30 years from now, 40. And, sometimes really some side problems, like side projects from kind of main projects that we're working on, find more immediate applications. We have a collaboration with people here on biosensors. It's not the main direction of our work, with Tom So's group, and it's from photonics perspective, kind of, simple photonics problem, but I think it's exciting to see, something that we know and something that's kind of simple from photonics engineering's perspective be important for real-time biosensing, right? And for patients, right? So I think, what I would advise is that you always find the problem, and that's what I thought about, that you think you would be interested in doing for like at least 5 years. There's a lot to learn. I enjoyed the process. I liked experimental side, physics, math, everything. And then, when you work on it, maybe the main direction of your work will be applied 30 years from now, but you can always have a side projects and collaborations that would be applied more immediately, right? In different fields and branch out your work in different directions.
Questions from the audience and Zoom or Zoom? You want to go ahead? I think you can go around too.
Whoever asked.
So you studied briefly at the University of Sydney.
Yeah.
Before you. How did you learn about opportunities that were in the United States, and what encouraged you to go to Caltech?
That was a very different time. Everything was by mail, right? There was very, very early days of internet, but applications were by mail, right, in the 90s. Yeah, so I don't know how much you know about history of Europe, but Yugoslavia was at war, which broke it apart in the 90s. And part of it, I was there. I mean, it was a horrible time, but I couldn't even pay application fees from where I lived. And Caltech didn't have application fees. That's the reason why I applied. And everyone from Serbia, there were a lot of people from Serbia there. There were no application fees for graduate students. And I could only afford to apply to 2 other schools because application fees were larger than my parents' annual salary. At that time, there was a major crisis also. And it was also a war. And, I think everybody was just trying to, it was crazy, and a lot of young people, educated people, around 500,000 left during that time. And we were just trying to live wherever we could go. So in Australia, I knew through my friend who went there a year before, there was an opportunity, and I heard about the group, and I went there, and it's the Southern Hemisphere, so school year starts earlier. So I went at the beginning of the year, and I landed there. I arrived, and a couple of months later, I heard that I was accepted to Caltech, but I was already in Sydney, and I didn't have money for a plane ticket to Caltech, actually, from Sydney. But anyway, kind of everything worked out. Then I got some fellowship. I worked as a TA for circuits. I also, initially, I started doing research, and I got all the money for research. But then, I could also save enough money for a plane ticket. And, they were actually really wonderful. They offered me to stay for a PhD. They even kind of offered me to return in a year if I didn't like Caltech, to return on a full fellowship. But I kind of liked it and stayed at Caltech and moved there. Everything was again by mail, right? And it's kind of crazy, but today's standards. But what you had to do is you write a letter. There were emails, right? I can't remember if you would request them to mail you catalogs, but maybe by email. But I think it was mostly by snail mail, right? And then you receive these application manuals or something by snail mail, and you apply by snail mail, and that's kind of how things go. And you receive also acceptance letter in actual mail. Right? I do remember email correspondence going on, but it was mostly going on by mail. So everything, we live. It's unbelievable because that was not such a long time ago, right? Late 90s. 25 years ago. Of course, some of you were born there, but not like when I was. In my 20s, thinking like there was not such a big difference 25 years before that. And, that was, the world didn't really change that much, right? But now it's all instantaneous, right? So many more opportunities, right? If I want to do something, I can, within like 30 minutes, find all the opportunities for grad school, for everything. You don't need to send a letter and wait and apply and everything. The process was very slow. Maybe that required some, more motivation, right? To all kind of do all of that hard work, right, with mailing and everything. But I think it's absolutely wonderful that today, no matter where you live in the world, you can have instant access to all the information and opportunities. Thanks to engineering, right? Right.
Thanks to photonics and a bit to transistors too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, so we're past the original 1 hour, but Mary Kay informed us that we have the room, so we can stay until we're out of questions. Please.
I was just curious, like, why should someone consider pursuing a PhD in the first place?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think, you know, I've had, the question is, why should someone consider doing PhD in the first place? It's an excellent question. You know, I had some students in the past who were here for master's degree. Like I had a French student, right? And he was admitted to PhD program. But during the master's kind of time, that was when we had masters and PhD, you first do masters and then the PhD, you know, he decided that he would go back to France and he would go work there in industry. And he did calculation, and getting a PhD, you know, is kind of useless if you go to France and do your work in industry, because by the time he gets a PhD, and, you know, he showed me all these graphs, you know, he wouldn't earn that much money, right? And there is no point. And PhD is just, you know, very French analytical, you know, everything. And, you know, there are definitely reasons like that. Also, you know, I had an undergrad student. I mean, he actually received PhD, but when he finished with co-term here, you know, he also got job offers from Tesla, different companies, and, you know, then, you know, he was thinking of going there. Why would he do PhD, right? And even his parents told him, why would you do PhD? Go get a job, you know, earn money. He stayed for PhD, and actually he's now has a proper job. I don't think he regretted it. I mean, really, but the reason why I'm saying all this is depends on what you want to do. Right? I think in the US, still, even if you work in the industry, PhD is important to climb up the ladder, corporate ladder. Right? And I had some students who got master's degree, working in industry, climbed up the ladder, but then they realized that there is a ceiling, so they came back or went elsewhere and did PhD. Right? And, you know, certainly if you want to go to academia or do research, you know, you need a PhD. Right? It's absolutely important. But even again in industry, it is important. But of course, you know, if you want to do something completely different, you know, you may not need a PhD, right? Maybe if you even decide to do something unrelated to engineering. But I do think that PhD, and this goes back to when you asked me a question about my students, doing PhD makes you an independent researcher. And develops the process of thinking and, you know, research in you. I mean, that whole experience is very, very important. I don't think you have that. I didn't have it. I don't think people have it before they do PhD, before they spend 5 years working on problems for which they don't know if there is a solution. It's a very different thing from doing homework, right? When someone gives you homework, you know, hopefully they know there is a solution, right? Not always, but in most cases, that should be the case, right? But PhD is completely different. Nobody knows if there is an answer, right? And I think that experience will, you know, is crucial, of course, for being an academic, but, you know, not just that. I think it's also really, really important, even if you're starting a company or being venture capitalist. I mean, which some of my group members did. I do think it shapes. I know it's not easy, but hang in there. Right? It's valuable. Yeah, and it's, you know, it's interesting. I know that there is a counterexample. You may say, well, there are all these rich people who dropped out, right? You know, so why would I do PhD, right? And then you see, you know, they dropped out, and then they earned all that money, and then they try to kind of learn new things, right? You know, kind of almost go to grad school, kind of recreate that experience for themselves. So I think it's worth it.
There's a lot more poor people who dropped out, unfortunately. So I think
true.
I think those are outliers.
The ones who became rich and started companies and so on.
Those are the visible ones.
What do you think of the next frontier in photonics?
Next frontier in photonics. Yes, I mean, it is, I mentioned that a little bit, but just more broadly in photonics, it is about integration. I mean, we're hoping that photonics can go through the same revolution that electronics went through, but at the level of integration, it's still quite modest. We're talking maybe about hundreds of components, not billions that you have in electronics. And some applications require much higher density of integration, right? And many more components to handle some complex problems. So I think the next frontier would be scaling and figuring out how to do that. And we, our team has worked on that problem through that inverse design that we were talking about, which is now more or less kind of mainstream of photonics in terms of design, designing things not by brute force, but by using some optimization tools. But also, to solve problems, I mean, we mostly work with silicon, even in photonics, but a lot of functions require other materials. And there is a lot of heterogeneous integration. So high density integration and heterogeneous integration, layering different materials. And Eric works on this a lot, of course, in the different contexts, but figuring out how you can, put all these different materials on top of silicon and electronics and photonics and all of this so that you can handle all these functions. I think no matter what problem you work on, kind of technologically, it goes down to that. Yeah, even if you work on atomic physics, quantum systems and quantum simulators, the main technological issue they have is building photonics to manipulate atoms, right? So it's always high density integration, high speed, heterogeneous materials for all the different applications.
More questions, please. Yes, please.
You briefly mentioned that your group does some work in AR and VR. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think a little bit of work. We have a project funded by FRL, I mean, formerly Oculus, but it is related to problems that they have to handle right there, which is, filtering and beam steering kind of type problems and making it in a compact footprint of glasses. So, not like building the whole system. We're not really doing any packaging, but kind of solving optics problems that are critical at the system level. Yeah. In a compact way, right?
More questions, please.
Hopefully this summer. I haven't been since 2019, right? Yeah, my parents are there, and because of the pandemic. But yeah, hopefully I'll go there this summer to see them in fall. Yeah, normally I would go kind of at least once a year and visit collaborators in Germany and so on. But yeah. Hopefully, yeah, we all can travel and see families and enjoy life pretty soon.
What's the atmosphere like over there? Is everybody becoming nervous? What's going on in Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole Europe, yeah. But regarding pandemic, they're much more relaxed, right?
Can you give us a broad overview on the efforts and work that's been done on quantum sensing and specifically biosensing?
Oh, quantum sensing? Most of quantum sensing, the question was what has been done in quantum sensing. Most of quantum sensing work has been with, again, color centers in diamond primarily, kind of lab type experiments, magnetic field sensing. Some of the most critical issues there are related to signal to noise ratio determines sensitivity of the system, and people cannot collect enough photons, and that kind of limits the sensor. So they're trying to work with different systems or make optical structures around. But some of the leading work has been done by few groups at Harvard on that. And there's some industrial interest now, but there are also very practical problems. I mean, quantum sensing is certainly a simpler problem than quantum computing or even quantum networking, because you basically just need one qubit, right? For quantum networking, you need qubit every 50 miles, right, and entangling them. Some quantum sensors, of course, we know they would benefit from quantum entanglement, but even with a single qubit, you can do some of the very sensitive magnetic field sensing and so on better than other sensors. So it's some way quantum sensing is a low-hanging fruit of quantum technologies, but there are still unanswered problems there.
Any more questions? Going once, going twice? Anybody on Zoom?
We went over time.
We did, yeah. It's great. No,
Thank you
that's
so
good.
much. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I guess no more questions. Let's thank Professor Vuckovic. Thank you, Mary Kay. And thanks to everyone on Zoom for listening in.
Thank you.
See you at the next one.
Thank you.